Hey, it's Becky and today we're going to be talking about You've Reached Sam by Dustin Thao. This is a beautifully written book. It's all about grief and loss as character Sam has passed away in an accident, and the character followed is his girlfriend who's dealing with the fallout and the grief of losing her boyfriend. Julie is our main character, and as we go throughout the book we see as she clings on to Sam through phone calls where she's talking to Sam through these phone calls beyond the grave. The story itself follows a lot of grief and love, and also like the act of kind of letting go and opening up to those feelings and kind of getting through the grief and the denial phase of it. And she kind of gets a second chance of saying goodbye. I would definitely recommend, if you've had a recent loss or anything, it's probably going to make you quite emotional, so I wouldn't recommend it for those people, but it really is a well written story which shows the connection between people and the things you go through. They're not always right when you're grieving, but sometimes you can get a second chance, and sometimes it's needed and sometimes it's required to get that. Julie herself is not a likeable protagonist, and I think a lot of people reading it who maybe haven't experienced grief in any way, and even those that have, may see the character as quite unlikable and selfish, but she's had an unimaginable loss and her actions are very realistic. She tries to avoid the funeral, for example. She tries to avoid grieving with the family, and she's trying to move on and try to cope with these emotions as a young person, and she doesn't quite understand how to do so. And I think throughout the story we see her grow and kind of develop the second chance of saying goodbye and learning how to grieve properly and be emotionally sensitive to that. And while she's not the most sympathetic character, because you do get frustrated with her actions in both flashbacks and the present day, you do start to root for her, and letting go of Sam in the end becomes something you can really relate to, which is really well done. Sam, despite being a kind of ghostly figure, is really the central heart of the book itself. His kindness and his love for Julie kind of shine through their phone calls, and we see a lot of great aspects which kind of builds on that grief from Julie's perspective because they've lost someone so great. However, the book itself is really focused heavily on Julie and Sam, to the point where a lot of the side characters don't feel quite developed. So if you're a very character driven person rather than plot, you'd probably be okay with this, but if you're looking for kind of a more development in that area, you might not enjoy it as much. The focus is really Julie and Sam as the central two characters. And the plotline itself is written really well. You kind of get flashbacks to Julie and Sam's relationship, and then you get the present where Julie is kind of grieving and gets calls from Sam from beyond the grave, and it's a really interesting mystery of kind of going back and seeing what their life was like beforehand and kind of experience that grief whilst you're reading, and then also kind of coming to terms with it at the same time as Julie is during the phone calls. The plot itself doesn't have any kind of heavy twists or turns. It is very much a kind of contemporary with a fantasy twist element of the phone calls, but it doesn't need to be. The focus is very much on the emotional aspects of it, and the going through the emotional journey of letting go is the important part of the story. The writing style is very lyrical in how it's done without being overly flowery, and I found that the writing really helped guide you through the emotions really well without being overbearing and not shocking you either. There is a lot of atmospheric prose which really pulled you into the story and the world that Julie's living in after Sam, and I really found that the emotional arc and the writing of Julie's emotions were really vivid. Really, you could really be empathetic to her as a person despite her character not being totally sympathetic, if that makes sense. The one thing I would say is the pacing is quite slow. The focus is on the emotional journey, which isn't always really fast paced. So if you're looking for an action filled book, this one won't be for you, but if you're looking for something that's more character driven, focused on like the emotions of grief, then you'd probably really enjoy reading it. The themes of the book are obviously about kind of loss and grief and also love. I really enjoyed that kind of the central theme of it isn't just about letting go, it's about the balance of not forgetting the person but kind of remembering them in a way that really helps you move on. Lingering connections like Julie's connection to Sam through the phone calls whilst was really helping her emotionally and getting her through the day, isn't really helpful in the long run. And actually kind of learning how to regulate your emotions in a way that's healthy was vital for this story. And I really enjoyed how it was written in that fantasy way of the phone calls being kind of a metaphor for this. In general, I'd say this book would be great for kind of young adults, people who maybe haven't experienced grief firsthand, just to kind of learn more about it, or even if they had someone pass away close to them, reading this could probably help them learn a bit more about emotional regulation. But yeah, it really is a great book. I'd say it's a YA contemporary or YA romance rather than a straight up fantasy book, but there is that kind of magical, unexplained element of the phone calls, which may frustrate people if they want to find out what they are, but they're really used as more of a tool to showcase the journey that Julie's on, rather than being a mystery that's to be solved at the end of the story. But yeah, that's my kind of overall thoughts on it. I really enjoyed the premise. There was a lot of emotional depth to it, and I really enjoyed the relationship between Julie and Sam and how that was explored throughout the book. My main issue was probably the slow pacing, but I read it so fast that it didn't really bother me, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy reading it as well. So yeah, if you've already read You've Reached Sam, do let me know what your thoughts are, or if you're going to pick it up after watching this review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope to see you again in the next video.